London, 1807. The chandeliers of Grosvenor Square glowed like captured stars, each crystal catching the soft hum of the final ball of the season. Beneath that glittering canopy stood Lady Eleanor Whitmore, graceful, pale, her beauty untouched but her fortune in ruins. Behind her smile lay the quiet terror of a woman standing at the edge of her family's collapse. Every rustle of silk, every muffled laugh behind a fan, reminded her that she was no longer the sought-after debutante of last spring. Whispers now followed her like a second shadow. The Whitmores are drowning in debt. Her father wagered even the townhouse. Such a pity, such a waste of beauty. Eleanor felt the weight of each word as though the chandeliers themselves had dimmed for her. Her dance card was empty. Her mother's eyes, watchful and desperate, darted toward every titled man in the room. Lady Whitmore had dressed her daughter in borrowed satin and pinned fake pearls in her hair, but the scent of despair clung to them both more strongly than perfume. Eleanor's fingers trembled slightly as she lifted her fan to her lips, not from the chill, but from the knowledge that the only offer likely to come tonight would not be one of affection. Then the murmurs stilled. A new presence entered the ballroom, a tall, severe figure framed by the golden light of the doorway. The Duke of Ravenshire. His very name silenced gossip. Men nodded stiffly. Women bowed their heads with uneasy fascination. He moved like someone born to command obedience without raising his voice. His dark coat fit him with military precision, his expression carved from marble. There were stories, whispered and embellished, that he had buried 2 wives, that the moors around his estate were haunted by their restless spirits. Some said he ruined rivals with a smile, others that he never smiled at all. Eleanor had heard them all. Still, when his eyes found her across the ballroom, her breath caught. It wasn't attraction, something deeper, colder, like recognition. As if he saw not the dress, not the pearls, but the truth she was trying to hide. Her mother's hand pressed urgently against her arm. "Eleanor," she hissed, "he's looking this way." The Duke crossed the marble floor with deliberate calm, his polished boots barely whispering against the surface. He bowed slightly, precisely enough to honor formality, yet distant enough to remind her he needn't bow at all. "Lady Eleanor," he said. His voice was low, textured, like the first roll of thunder before rain. "You have not danced tonight." Eleanor's throat tightened. "No, Your Grace. I have not been asked." "Then I am asking," he replied simply. No charm. No preamble. The orchestra began another waltz as though summoned by fate itself. As they moved to the center of the floor, the crowd parted. Eleanor's hand rested lightly on his arm, though her pulse raced beneath her glove. The Duke's touch was firm yet unexpectedly careful, as though he feared to startle her. When the first notes swelled, he guided her into motion with surprising grace. Around them, faces blurred into light and color. "You are frightened," he said quietly, so only she could hear. Her breath faltered. "I do not frighten easily, Your Grace." "Then you are wiser than most," he murmured. There was no smile in his tone, but something gentler, an acknowledgment, perhaps, that they both understood what this dance meant. For her, a lifeline. For him, something unfathomable. When the waltz ended, he released her hand, bowed slightly, and before she could speak, turned to address her mother. Words were exchanged, formal, concise, decisive. Within the hour, the Duke had asked for Lady Eleanor's hand in marriage. It was not romance that sealed the engagement, but necessity. Her mother wept with relief, calling it salvation. Eleanor felt as though her heart had been sold along with her dowry. The gossip spread before dawn, traveling faster than the wind off the Thames. The Duke of Ravenshire to wed the ruined beauty. She's his next victim. Perhaps the curse will claim her too. Days passed in a haze of preparation. Eleanor moved through them like a ghost, her emotions tucked beneath layers of silk and obedience. The wedding itself, held in St. George's under grey London skies, was quiet yet elegant. The Duke's expression never softened. His vows were spoken with precision, not passion. But when the ring touched her finger, she glimpsed something flicker in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or recognition. After the ceremony, the carriages rolled through rain toward Ravenshire Manor, deep in the Yorkshire countryside. The journey stretched long into night. Through the misted glass, Eleanor watched the city fade, replaced by rolling moors and winding roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The farther they traveled, the quieter the Duke became. He sat across from her, gloved hands resting on his cane, gaze fixed on the storm outside. When lightning split the sky, Eleanor's heart leapt. He turned to her then, his face half-shadowed, and for a moment she thought he might speak something kind, something human. But he only said, "You need not fear the rumors, Lady Ravenshire. You will be safe in my house." The words, meant to soothe, chilled her instead. Safe in his house, but not in his heart. She turned her face to the window again, watching the rain trace trembling paths down the glass. Hours later, the carriage stopped before Ravenshire Manor, a towering fortress of stone and ivy, its windows glowing faintly against the storm. Servants waited in solemn rows, their faces pale in the lamplight. The Duke stepped out first, offering his hand to help her descend. The air smelled of wet earth and old roses. Inside, the manor seemed alive with silence. The grand hall rose before her, lined with ancestral portraits whose painted eyes followed her every step. One, larger than the rest, was covered by a heavy black drapery. As a flash of lightning illuminated the room, Eleanor noticed a servant cross himself while glancing toward it. "Who is that portrait of?" she asked softly. The Duke's voice echoed faintly in the vastness. "A part of this house best left undisturbed." He did not look back as he ascended the marble staircase, leaving her standing beneath the chandelier, her wedding gown gleaming like fragile armor. The silence closed around her, deep and endless. When at last she was shown to her chambers, Eleanor stood by the window, gazing out at the storm that raged over the moors. Somewhere in the darkness, a wolf's distant howl answered the wind. She pressed her palm against the cold glass, wondering what fate awaited her in this house of whispers. Down the corridor, a clock struck midnight. The echo rolled through the halls like a warning. Eleanor, now Duchess of Ravenshire, closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Do not be afraid." Yet as the thunder cracked again, she could not shake the feeling that the house itself was listening, and that her story had only just begun. The days that followed her arrival at Ravenshire Manor passed in uneasy quiet, as though the very air were holding its breath. The servants spoke little in her presence, moving about their duties with the precision of soldiers who had long learned silence was safer than speech. Eleanor tried to learn their names, but their eyes flickered away whenever she met them. The Duke remained distant, courteous but unreachable. He dined at one end of a table long enough to seat 20, while she sat at the other, her words swallowed by the cavernous room. Even when she thanked him for small kindnesses, a shawl placed near the fire, fresh flowers arranged in her chamber, he merely inclined his head, neither cold nor warm, a man who had long forgotten the art of ordinary conversation. The manor itself was a masterpiece of contradictions, beauty built upon sorrow. Great windows looked out over the Yorkshire moors, endless and grey, while inside the halls hung paintings of ancestors who seemed to judge her intrusion. The scent of beeswax and damp stone lingered in every corridor. Yet it was not the silence that unnerved her most, it was the sense of being watched. At night, as she crossed from her dressing room to her bed, she felt eyes upon her, though no one stood there. She told herself it was imagination, the mind's rebellion against loneliness. Still, she began to lock her door. On the third morning, she found a small box resting upon her vanity. It was carved from dark oak and sealed with a crest she did not recognize, 2 ravens intertwined above a single rose. Inside lay a delicate silver locket and a folded note written in the Duke's unmistakable hand, "For courage, should you ever need it." There was no signature, no explanation. She touched the locket hesitantly, half expecting it to vanish. Something stirred in her, a flicker of curiosity, of empathy, even of pity for the man whose gestures were as cautious as his speech. That afternoon, she ventured into the gardens. The air was sharp and sweet with rain, the hedges wild from neglect. She wandered among the stone statues, their faces softened by moss, and paused by a marble fountain whose waters no longer ran. There she encountered Mrs. Blythe, the housekeeper, an older woman with a stiff posture and kind eyes that tried not to linger. "You are brave to walk alone, Your Grace," she said softly. "The moors have a way of confusing one who's not born to them." Eleanor smiled faintly. "I am learning, Mrs. Blythe. The house feels so still I needed air." The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Stillness is safer, my lady. The Duke, he means well, but Ravenshire remembers more than it should." Before Eleanor could ask what she meant, the old woman bowed and withdrew, her words leaving behind a chill that clung to the Duchess long after. That evening, she joined the Duke for supper. The firelight caught the sharp angles of his face, revealing a man accustomed to command but not comfort. Between them lay a silence that stretched like a bridge neither dared cross. Finally, Eleanor spoke. "Your home is beautiful, Your Grace. Yet it feels burdened." He set down his glass, meeting her eyes with unsettling steadiness. "Beauty is often burdened. The past has a habit of refusing its grave." She studied him carefully. "Do you believe that?" "I have lived it," he answered, his tone neither defensive nor confessional, simply factual. Then, after a pause, he added, "You need not concern yourself with the ghosts of Ravenshire. They are loyal creatures. They harm only those who betray them." It was not the reassurance she had hoped for, but the faint curve of irony in his voice almost made her smile. For the first time, she glimpsed something human beneath the reputation. Weariness, perhaps even guilt. A week passed before the house saw company. A neighboring family, the Langleys, visited for dinner. Their laughter filled the halls like a foreign language. Lord Langley, a stout, jovial man, offered clumsy compliments, while his wife whispered loudly about the Duke's tragic luck with brides. Eleanor endured it with grace until Lady Langley, emboldened by wine, leaned close and murmured, "Tell me, Your Grace, do you not fear becoming the next Duchess to vanish into legend?" The room fell silent. The Duke's knife stilled against his plate. His expression did not change, yet the air thickened as if the fire itself recoiled. He rose, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I will not have my wife insulted under my own roof." Lady Langley stammered an apology, her cheeks blotched with embarrassment, but he had already turned away. The guests soon made their excuses, retreating under the weight of his restrained fury. When the doors closed behind them, Eleanor found herself trembling, not from fear, but from an unexpected sense of protection. Later that night, she found him in the library, standing before the tall windows where the moonlight silvered his hair. "You did not need to defend me," she said quietly. "I did not do it for you," he replied. "I did it for decency." Then, after a beat, "Though perhaps I should have done it sooner, for myself." She stepped closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "You bear the rumors like armor, yet I think they wound you all the same." His gaze shifted to the dying fire. "A man cannot fight lies without becoming a villain in their telling." There was silence. The clock ticked softly. Something unspoken passed between them, understanding, fragile as breath. When he finally left the room, she wandered among the shelves, tracing her fingers along the spines of old books. One volume stood out, a family ledger bound in cracked leather. Tucked between its pages was a small portrait, half faded by time. Eleanor drew it out and froze. The woman's face was unmistakable, delicate features, soft brown eyes, the same auburn hair that framed Eleanor's own. It was like staring into a mirror touched by sorrow. The next morning, unable to contain her unease, she asked Mrs. Blythe about the portrait. The housekeeper paled. "That was the first Duchess, God rest her. She died here years ago." "How?" "A fall," they said. "But some claim she was pushed." The word struck Eleanor like a draught through stone. That night, she approached the Duke's study, intending to confront him, but stopped at the door when she heard movement within. Through the crack, she saw him kneeling before a marble bust of the same woman from the portrait, his expression carved with grief. He whispered something, too soft to catch, but the tenderness in his tone was unmistakable. Eleanor withdrew quietly, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. Whatever truth lay buried in Ravenshire's walls, it was not the tale society had told her. Beneath the Duke's coldness lived a sorrow too deep for cruelty. When she returned to her chamber, the locket still lay on her vanity, glinting faintly in the candlelight. She opened it again, half expecting an answer within, but found only her own reflection. Outside, the wind swept across the moors, and somewhere in the distance, The chapel bell tolled once, as if warning her that the past she sought might yet consume her. The storm came without warning. One moment, the moors lay shrouded in grey stillness. The next, the heavens split open with thunder that rattled the windows of Ravenshire Manor. Rain lashed the glass like a living thing, and every gust of wind seemed to whisper through the corridors, carrying old secrets. Eleanor stood at her window, watching the landscape dissolve into darkness. The Duke had not returned from his evening ride, though the hour had long passed. A knot of worry coiled within her. For all his reserve, she had begun to sense something unspoken beneath his calm, something that reached for her, even if he did not yet know it. When the great doors finally burst open, she hurried down the staircase. He entered soaked through, mud spattered upon his boots, eyes shadowed with fatigue. The firelight caught the rain dripping from his coat, and for a moment he looked less like a nobleman than a man hunted by ghosts. "You should not wait up," he said, his voice low. "The moors are treacherous in weather like this." "I could say the same to you," she replied softly. She took his cloak, her fingers brushing his arm by accident. He stiffened, but did not pull away. The silence between them deepened, filled only by the crackle of the hearth. Finally, Eleanor spoke the question that had haunted her since the night she found the portrait. "Tell me about her, the woman in the painting." The Duke's jaw tightened. For a long time he said nothing. Then, with a weary sigh, he crossed to the fire. "She was my first wife," he said. "Your cousin, though distantly. Her name was Clara. You must have heard the rumors." "I heard what others say," Eleanor answered, stepping closer. "I wish to hear the truth." He turned to her then, his eyes dark as the storm outside. "The truth is neither kind nor simple. Clara was young, too young to bear the weight of this place. She loved freedom, the city, laughter. Ravenshire smothered her. I was not the man she needed me to be. I thought discipline could replace affection. I was wrong." His voice faltered, the words dragged from a wound long sealed. "One night she rode out during a storm much like this. Her horse returned without her. They found her at the riverbank by dawn. The room seemed to shrink around them. Eleanor's breath caught. So it was an accident. Perhaps," he said bitterly. "Or perhaps despair drove her there. Either way, society found it easier to blame me. A husband's grief is less entertaining than his guilt." For the first time, Eleanor saw him not as a figure of rumor, but as a man hollowed by loss. His every gesture, his measured speech, his relentless composure, all were armor against the cruelty of a world eager to see him fall. The realization unsettled her. The thunder cracked again, closer this time. She flinched. He looked at her, and something in his expression softened. "You are trembling." "It's only the storm," she said. He stepped closer, his shadow merging with hers in the firelight. "You are not made of fear, Lady Ravenshire. But I know what it means to be haunted." His voice lowered. "Are you scared?" Her heart gave a sharp, traitorous flutter. She met his gaze, the heat of the fire flickering across their faces. "I was," she admitted. "But not any more." For a moment, the world seemed to still. The rain softened against the glass, as though the storm itself paused to listen. His hand rose, hesitated in midair, then brushed a strand of damp hair from her cheek. It was a small gesture, chaste, almost reverent, but it carried the weight of a confession. "You are unlike anyone I have ever known," he said quietly. Eleanor felt the truth of it ripple through her like warmth. Yet before she could answer, a sound echoed through the manor, a sharp clang from the east corridor, where the draped portrait hung. They turned at once. The Duke's face paled. "Stay here," he commanded, striding from the room. Ignoring his warning, she followed at a distance, her slippered feet silent against the floor. The east wing was colder, the air thick with damp and dust. When she reached the grand hall, she found him standing before the uncovered portrait. The black drapery lay on the floor, and the painting stared down at them both, Clara's likeness, her eyes hauntingly alive. "It fell," he said, though the words lacked conviction. He reached to touch the frame, then froze. There is something behind it. Together they lifted the heavy canvas. Hidden within the wall was a narrow door. It opened with a groan, revealing a small chamber lined with shelves and old documents. The air smelled of mildew and candle wax. On a table lay a stack of letters bound with faded ribbon. Eleanor picked one up, the paper brittle under her fingers. "They're addressed to you," she whispered. He took them from her, scanning the first lines. His face darkened. "These are from Clara, written after her death was said to have occurred." Eleanor stared at him in disbelief. "That's impossible." "No," he murmured. "It's deliberate. Someone forged her death to hide her, to protect her." He sank into the chair, eyes narrowing. "These letters, they speak of a sister, a child, hidden under your name, Eleanor. She was not only my wife, she was your cousin by blood. Her sister lives still." Eleanor's mind reeled. "You mean my family knew?" "I believe your father did," the Duke said grimly. "He owed debts not only to men of money, but to men of power. Clara's disappearance served the Crown's interests. There was scandal documents she possessed that could have ruined a noble line. The truth was buried, and I was left as its scapegoat." Lightning flared through the narrow window, illuminating the anguish on his face. In that instant, Eleanor understood. His cruelty had never been malice, but punishment turned inward. "We can find her," she said suddenly. "If she lives, if any of this is true, we can bring her back." He looked up, disbelief warring with hope. "You would help me?" "Yes. Because I no longer believe the world that condemned you. And because—" She stopped herself, heart hammering. "Because no one deserves to bear such blame alone." He rose slowly, his eyes searching hers. "You speak like someone unafraid of ruin." "Perhaps ruin is the only place one can speak honestly," she replied. For the first time, a faint smile touched his lips, sad, astonished, almost grateful. The sound of rain eased outside, leaving behind the soft hiss of wind through the cracks. As they stood together before the fallen portrait, the Duke reached for her hand. "Then we are bound by truth now, not fear." Eleanor's fingers closed around his. "Then let us find it." From somewhere deep in the manor, a clock struck 3. Its toll echoed through the corridors like a promise. The fire burned low, casting their shadows long upon the wall where the portrait had once hung. Outside, the storm broke apart into calm. Yet neither of them saw the messenger's carriage already cutting through the dawn mist toward Ravenshire, bearing the royal seal, and an accusation that would soon shatter everything they had begun to trust. The morning light over Ravenshire Manor broke like the first sigh after a storm. For the first time since her arrival, Eleanor woke to the sound of birds instead of thunder, and a silence that felt less like dread and more like waiting. The fire had burned low through the night, and the faint scent of roses, her mother's favorite, lingered from the bouquet the Duke had placed at her bedside before dawn. He was gone now, of course, as he always was before the house stirred. But something had changed. His absence no longer felt cruel. It felt deliberate, measured, like a man learning to tread gently through fragile glass. Downstairs, the manor hummed with uneasy life. Servants whispered of a letter from London, one sealed with the crest of the crown. When Eleanor descended the staircase, their chatter dimmed into silence, as though her presence itself had become an omen. She greeted them softly, every movement calm, her posture unshaken. She was no longer the frightened girl brought here under her family's debts. There was steel now beneath her grace. Her eyes, though tired, held that rare, quiet dignity that made people lower theirs in return. The Duke awaited her in the drawing-room. Morning light fell across his face, softening the sharpness that once defined him. He stood beside the window, a letter in hand, its red seal already broken. "It seems the rumors have reached the palace," he said without turning. His voice was steady, but Eleanor heard what others could not, the tension beneath it, the weight of history pressing between every word. She stepped closer, her silk hem brushing the marble floor. "Rumors of what, Your Grace?" "That I have hidden something. Or rather, someone." He turned then, meeting her gaze. "My brother." The word carried centuries of sorrow. She had heard the servants speak of it in broken fragments. An accident, a scandal, a disappearance that had tainted the Ravenshire name. But the truth was far darker. "He is alive," the Duke continued, his expression unreadable. "And he has returned to claim what he believes was stolen from him." Eleanor felt her breath still. "Your title, my soul." He smiled faintly, but it was a weary, human smile. "He holds letters, documents that could undo all I have rebuilt. He threatens to expose everything, including you." A silence stretched between them, fragile yet electric. She wanted to reach for him, to offer some word of comfort, but restraint, always restraint, held her still. "Then let him," she said softly. "The truth cannot destroy what was never false." The Duke's gaze lingered on her, searching. "You speak as though I deserve such mercy." She met his eyes with quiet resolve. "You are not the man they call cruel. You are a man punished by his own ghosts." It was then that he crossed the distance between them, not with force, but with aching hesitance. His gloved hand brushed her cheek, tentative, as though she were something sacred. "Eleanor," he murmured, the sound of her name like a confession. "If I fall, I would have you nowhere near the wreckage." She smiled through the shimmer of tears. "And yet, my lord, I was born to walk through ruins." By dusk, Ravenshire Manor was alive with tension. A carriage approached through the fog, bearing the Duke's estranged brother, Lord Alaric Ravenshire. The ghost returned to claim the living. He entered with a smile that did not touch his eyes, his resemblance to the Duke uncanny save for the darkness in his demeanor. Where the Duke's cruelty had once been a rumor, Alaric's was an art. "So this is the prize," Alaric said, glancing at Eleanor. "You always did have a taste for delicate things." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You will not speak of her." Alaric laughed. "Then perhaps she should not stand between us." He drew a folded parchment from his coat, a document bearing the Duke's seal, the same one he had been accused of forging years ago. "You signed this, brother. A confession to debts owed and crimes committed. The crown will take everything." The Duke took the paper, his expression unreadable. "And what do you demand in return for your silence?" "Her," Alaric said simply. "You will relinquish your claim. The lady will be mine." The room froze. Eleanor's heart pounded, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "You mistake me, my lord. I am no man's prize." Alaric smirked. "Ah, but you will be, once your husband's name is dragged through the mud and you have nowhere to turn." Before the Duke could speak, Eleanor stepped forward. "Then drag it," she said. "Expose him. But you will find no victory in my ruin. I married him knowing the whispers, the shadows, the graves that follow his name, and yet I stayed. That is something your titles and papers can never command." Her words cut through the silence like light through stained glass. Alaric faltered, if only for a moment, as though he'd glimpsed something he could not corrupt. The Duke turned to her then, his expression unreadable, but in his eyes there was something unguarded, something almost like reverence. "You have done what I could not," he said quietly. "You have faced my ghosts and found no fear." Alaric's sneer returned. Beautiful words for a doomed pair. He turned sharply and strode toward the door. "The crown will hear of this before sunrise." But when he reached the threshold, a figure stepped forward, Lady Whitmore, Eleanor's mother, flanked by 2 royal messengers. "The crown has already heard," she said, "and it sides with truth." It was over within moments. The forged confession was declared false, Alaric's dealings with foreign creditors exposed. He was escorted away in silence, his empire of deceit crumbling behind him. When the doors closed, the Duke turned to Eleanor, disbelief softening into something more fragile, hope. "You knew," he said. "You sent for them." She smiled faintly. "You once told me I should never underestimate a Whitmore." The air between them shimmered with the warmth of unspoken words. The firelight caught the gold in her hair, and for the first time he allowed himself to breathe. "Eleanor," he whispered, "forgive me for all the nights I mistook silence for strength. She stepped closer, resting her hand against his chest. "And forgive me for fearing the man you never were." Outside, the bells of Ravenshire tolled, a sound not of morning, but of beginning. The manor, once steeped in shadows, now stood luminous beneath the dawn. And as the Duke drew his wife into his arms, the ghosts of the past finally stilled, leaving only the living to write what would come next. In the years that followed, poets would speak of the Duke who learned to love and the lady who taught him how. But those who lived through it would remember something simpler: the sound of rain against glass, the echo of a question once whispered in fear, and the answer that had changed everything. "No," she had finally said. "I am not afraid."